Hello and welcome to this Ask the Expert session of the World Bank Fragility Forum. My name is Nathan Shea with the Asia Foundation, and it's a pleasure to introduce this session titled Aid in Conflict-Affected Borderlands, the Rohingya Crisis in Bangladesh. Over 1 million Rohingya refugees currently live in dire conditions in the world's largest refugee camp along the Myanmar-Bangladesh border. Almost 3 years after the 2017 exodus, there appears little hope for repatriation or integration in the short term. And there exists major challenges for donors and aid agencies that are working in the camps. This discussion features a conversation between Jessica Olney, a researcher who has worked for over 10 years in Myanmar and Bangladesh, and Manzoor Hasan, Executive Director for the Center for Peace and Justice at BRAC University in Dhaka. Both were involved in a recent study by CPJ and the Asia Foundation, which Jessica will introduce shortly. The study was commissioned by the Cross-Border Local Research Network, a research program funded by the UK government as part of the Cross-Border Conflict Evidence Policy and Trends project. The Cross-Border Local Research Network is a partnership between the Asia Foundation, the Carnegie Middle East Center, and the Rift Valley Institute, and aims to develop a better global understanding of conflict and fragility in borderland regions. This video is the first of a series of 3 sessions on development and humanitarian aid in conflict-affected borderlands. The next 2 sessions will focus on the Horn of Africa and the Middle East. In this conversation, Jessica and Manzoor will touch on some of the study's key findings, including the role of transnational family networks and the importance of non-aid income in the coping strategies of Rohingya refugees. They will also discuss plans to localize the aid response in Bangladesh and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic in the camps. Over to you, Jessica.
Great, thank you, Nathan, and thanks to all the viewers who are tuning in. And thanks to Manzoor. So Manzoor Hasan is the Executive Director of the Center for Peace and Justice at BRAC University out of Dhaka, and it's an honor to have him here. Just to get us started, Manzoor, do you want to tell us a little bit about CPJ?
Jessica, thank you, Nathan. It's wonderful to be part of this conversation. Center for Peace and Justice is an institute within BRAC University. It was established in 2014. As you probably recall, we were just at that time coming to an end of the Millennium Development Goals, and the negotiations were taking place to establish a new set of goals, which later on became known as the Sustainable Development Goals. And at that time, the founder of BRAC, the largest NGO in the world, and the founder of BRAC University felt that there should be an institute within the university which will focus on some of the issues which will be tackled by the new set of goals. Subsequently, what became, say, Goal 16, and the issues within Goal 16 became really our mandate, the CPJ's mandate, and to work on issues like fragility, conflict, division within the societies, fragility, and kind of the lack of cohesion, and some of the threats that we were facing then and now would become the focal point for CPJ. So that's how we started. And our work really started in 2014, focusing on rule of law and legal empowerment, and really to kind of strengthen the role of paralegals in the society. And then, as we all know, in 2017, huge influx of refugees from Myanmar, and that is now the largest refugee camp in the world in Coxs Bazar, and it's really the size of a country like Bhutan. So we, given our mandate, got involved with that issue, and basically, I started doing a number of different activities, including research and some sort of programmatic work, and this is how we have kind of, our work has evolved since then. Thank you.
Great. So as you mentioned, CPJ has been working in the Rohingya camps, and CPJ is a training and research institution, but has also built a lot of relationships in the Rohingya community in order to do really meaningful community-based work. So I was wondering if you could describe a little bit overall about the work that CPJ has been doing, sort of as the knowledge partner in the humanitarian response in Cox's Bazar.
Sure, Jessica. I mean, basically, as I said, when the refugees started coming in 2017, I mean, we felt that there should be some sort of attempt to look at what's happening between the two communities, the host community in that part of Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar, and the refugees. So our initial work was to undertake some basic community level research to understand the dynamics and the relationship that's kind of evolving at that time. Because you have to remember that it was really the local people who actually responded to the need at the very beginning. Well before the international organizations and agencies got involved, they actually got involved with the helping of the refugees. So this was one area that kind of evolved. And as we will discuss later on, the work that we have done with Asia Foundation and some of the findings we will discuss later on. We also have undertaken some pilot programs to actually explore some new ideas in terms of how relationship can be built, how civic engagement can take place within the communities, and in order to really understand the dynamics and also to really find a way forward and really to share our findings and our knowledge with other bigger organizations who could then scale things up. And finally, the other area, important area for us has been advocacy, international advocacy. We have taken up the issue of justice and accountability on, and we have kind of worked with different international organizations and International Criminal Court and ICJ in terms of that particular issue. So these are three major areas: research, advocacy, and some programmatic work that we have been involved in the camps. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
And let me, given the fact that Jessica, you've been involved with the work, the research that we've been doing, and we all know that you've been involved with the Rohingya community over the last 10, 12 years and know a great deal about that community. This research which is known as the Rohingya Mobility Study, what do you think that we have managed to achieve? What are the kind of the initiative that was taken and how did it happen? Can you tell us a bit about that study, and kind of share your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. So the Rohingya Mobility Study is, as Nathan mentioned, one project within the broader cross-border local research network, and it's part of this global effort to develop a better understanding of conflict and fragility in borderland regions and really the impact of that on communities and community dynamics. So my background is very much working at the community level with Rohingya and other Myanmar communities for several years. So we knew from our relationships with Rohingya, our friendships, that so many of their families were separated across borders due to years, decades of persecution and displacement, irregular migration. But there was no real data to determine the prevalence of this family separation. So we wanted to learn about that and also how mobility and livelihood challenges and then the general hardships that Rohingya people are facing, how those all intersect in the camp environment. So I'm sure that many people watching this will have heard about the dire, very serious boat trafficking crisis afflicting the Rohingya, but we don't always hear about the background stories and the conditions, the decision-making process, the risk assessment, the really human element of how people end up in that position when they do things like engaging with smugglers or traffickers. And, that's often in pursuit of, finding a better life in a third country, but taking really dire risks to get there. So we wanted to just interrogate these questions. We worked with 22 Rohingya enumerators who have a lot of professional experience doing research in their own communities to carry out a large survey of over 1,600 households. So CPJ has a lot of experience now in the camps and designed the survey with a lot of sensitivity and just an opportunity for people to share about their families. So this took place over 6 months of field work. We also did 50 really in-depth interviews with community members to have them tell us about their own family's experiences with separation and the hardship that they endure in the camps.
Thank you. Thank you. And can you tell us a bit about the major findings that we got from this research? I think, as you said, it was a huge kind of experience for us, for all of us, and also some of the findings. What would you say are the notable findings from this research?
Sure. Yeah. We did have so many findings that we're actually still unpacking now. But one of the most important findings, I think, is that over half of camp households, actually 53%, have an immediate family member who's not living in the shelter with them. So these are people who have either gone on abroad to another country or are still remaining in Myanmar. And those people with family members abroad, over half are in Malaysia, about a quarter are in Saudi Arabia. So those are the two main destination or third countries that Rohingya people have been going to. And the rest are spread across Europe, North America, other Asian countries. So this indefinite separation from your loved ones really has a profound impact on people's daily life, but it's something that, you know, gets a bit glazed over sometimes. So just a little bit more about our findings. We found that 27% of people have an immediate family member in Myanmar. So of course that has ramifications on things like eventual repatriation. There are cross-border family networks that do, you know, tend to break down over the course of this very protracted displacement. Some refugees have been in the camps for over 30 years. And then there's internet shutdowns on both sides of the border, which also makes communication amongst families more difficult and can erode family ties. We also found that a fifth of households, which is really high compared to the actual rate, have a family member incarcerated. And most of these are in Myanmar. Many of them were arrested for defying movement restrictions there, for moving within their communities. So those are a bit of the key findings.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as you've just mentioned, it's a very transnational community. It's spread over many countries. They're kind of divided families that we are talking about. How does that affect them on a day-to-day basis, and how they deal with this issue? I mean, you know, I mean, this is very traumatic experience. I mean, we know wherever we have divided families, you know, there's a lot of different issues. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, family separation is already difficult, but the fact that people don't have travel documents, they really have most people have really no prospect of reuniting anytime in the future. There's really a big impact of that. But there are some, you know, resources that can come from that for camp families. So we also found that about a fifth of camp families have received a remittance in the past year. And those remittances are a really important source of income for those who receive them. Even though the amounts aren't huge, it's, you know, usually under $100, 8,000 taka, and only a few times a year, but it provides this vital safety net. So people's financial situation in the camps is truly very difficult. I mean, almost everyone lost all of their assets, their life savings when they fled. And some people do still have some assets remaining in Myanmar that a relative is looking after, but not too many. I think it was about 17%. And debt is also really high, which shows the difficulty people face to make ends meet. About 3/4 of the households we found are currently in debt. So there's this gap between the cost of living and the amount that people receive monthly as aid. So there's this pressure to supplement aid with some kind of income, but there aren't too many job opportunities available. So, you know, when we paint this picture, you can start to see why people are facing this hardship that becomes overwhelming and begin to contemplate maybe, you know, engaging with a smuggler or attempting a dangerous journey. It's a set of pretty dire options.
Okay,
so this is the situation. Yeah. So, I mean, you know a little bit about this study too, and CPJ's been developing some recommendations out of this body of work. So would you like to share some of the recommendations that we've been coming up with for the decision makers, policymakers, humanitarians?
Sure, Jessica. As you said, I mean, there is a gap, there is an income gap. I mean, for the refugees, relying on the handouts is not sufficient. I mean, there is a deficit there. And I think one of the ways, and we feel a sustainable way of dealing with this issue, is to actually look at the livelihood issue. I mean, this is very, very important. I mean, just relying on handouts and aid from agencies and organizations is not good enough. It doesn't really help the refugees in the long run. So the livelihood opportunities, I think, is a very important factor. And that, I think, policymakers will have to look into. And I think this is something that we will be talking about in the report as part of the recommendations. The other issue, and you have also touched on this, is the issue of dignity, the sense of dignity. I think, you know, I think it's linked with the previous point about livelihood. I think if people can look after themselves and kind of look after their own families, that enhances the level of dignity, and that is critical, I think, for the refugees to kind of be on their feet. And I think the other thing that we have to remember is the position of the host community. I mean, as I said earlier on, they are the people who actually responded and came forward. And I think the host community issues will have to be looked into, and how do we actually also reduce the burden that they are under is something that we need to focus on. And I think as a recommendation, we talk about that. The other major area is the issue of communication. I think it's communication in Coxs Bazar, in the Rakhine state. I think generally all of that sub-region kind of could do with better communication. I mean, in this day and age, and in this particular period of challenges that we are facing regarding COVID-19, communication has to improve. The internet shutdown is not helping the situation. So we need to really make effort and improve the communication issue. And then I think we need to continue with the learning process, you know, in terms of how people are and what's happening, the kind of challenges that they're facing. So we intend to continue, and we actually recommend that others should continue with this kind of study and try to find out more and more about what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing those recommendations. I hope it's in the back of everyone's minds, you know, that of course people just want to reunite with their families. And so how will we move towards that? How will that ever be possible for them? So, you know, of course, all of this is to say that when we talk to people in the camps, overwhelmingly, they want to go home. They don't see a way they could do that without major improvements on security, rights, citizenship, you know, these kind of things. But in the meantime, you know, we're looking at how to help people get on their feet, as you said, in the camps. And we know that actually the World Bank has recently contributed quite a large fund, around $35 million, to support Rohingya resilience in Bangladesh. And much of that will be used to fund work opportunities. I recently heard for up to about 20% of camp households. So that seems like a big step in the right direction. And I can echo that people in the camps are extremely eager for jobs. This is a request that you constantly hear from camp residents. It's the most human thing, right? To want to be able to provide for your family. Yeah. Absolutely,
absolutely. And I think this is a step in the right direction. And I think this kind of input, financial assistance will certainly go a long way in terms of developing the kind of issues that we've talked about, in terms of providing skills and in livelihood opportunities for the refugees and also for the host community. And I think I'd like to mention the youth. There's a lot of young people in the camps and also in the host community. And I think new training and kind of vocational training, I think would be extremely useful if some of that money can be used for that particular purpose. And I think at the end of the day, you know, what we are looking at is a promotion of social cohesion, you know, kind of people coming together, you know, through this kind of financial and technical assistance that people are talking about. So it's not a technical fix. It's a kind of a human challenge, humanitarian challenge, and it's a development challenge. And I think we need to look at it in a very integrated manner so that, you know, we can put the whole program together. So I think it's a step in the right direction, and I hope there will be more to come in the future. And not for just one particular community, but for the community at large. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So perhaps you could also share some of the other developments that have been going on in Cox's Bazar with regard to this theme of refugee and host community resilience. So we talked about livelihood opportunities, but there's also another conversation going on, which is around the localization of aid. So could you tell us a little bit more about this whole globalization movement and this call to localize aid in Cox's?
Yes, thank you. I mean, as I said at the very beginning, I mean, when the refugees came in, it was really the locals, the local people, the local organization who were the first responders and actually kind of welcomed these people. I actually was there in Cox's Bazar when the refugees started coming in August 2017. I saw some of that work that they were doing. And I think rightly so, what then happened was that national NGOs and international agencies and organizations had to step in, government came in, and there was a huge partnership that took place, and they actually did a wonderful job. But I think now that 3 years down the road, nearly, we need to look at how to make this whole process more effective, more efficient. And I think globally, I think what people are saying, and this is something that has happened in other parts of the world, is that the local stakeholders have to take a more prominent role in this. And this is something that I think we have been looking into, as you said, the whole localization process. And we have actually developed a roadmap which would help this localization process to take place. And in many ways, I think what we are looking at is that how to enhance the capacity of local organization, local NGOs. And when I talk about local, I'm not talking about local into Coxs Bazar or Teknaf or Kutupalong, but I'm talking about nationally, the organizations who can take on the responsibilities which some of the international organizations are playing. It's not really a disengagement on the part of international organization. It's really how we actually reconfigure that whole process that we are looking at. So, so I think it's important that we emphasize that, because if we don't do that, that itself, the fact that there are a lot of outsiders who are working, will create its own politics and own conflict, and would be, in the long run, be detrimental. So we are looking at a process and working with the government, working with international organization, national and local organization, and creating a kind of a mechanism. I mean, what we are calling a localization driver, and which will be an institutional framework, which will actually take this whole process forward. So this is something that we will have to see how it develops. And I would say that, keep an eye on that, on the space of localization. And hopefully Bangladesh can again show some good examples in terms of how to take this forward. Thank you.
Great. So obviously at the moment, we're actually on opposite sides of the world due to COVID-19. This is causing a lot of delays, not only for our work, but for everyone's, and delays for getting services to the Rohingya for things like expanded livelihood opportunities and this localizing of aid. But could you share more beyond that about the impact of the pandemic on these topics that we've been discussing?
Sure. I mean, this is an existential threat for all of us. I mean, COVID-19, and for a country like Bangladesh, which is so densely populated, and when we talk about the camps in Coxs Bazar, it's even more densely populated. I mean, this whole social, physical distancing is a concept that simply not work in our context. But it's important that this has to be done. So this is a huge challenge that we are facing, and because of COVID-19, the humanitarian assistance has become rather now limited because of the fact that we don't want people to go there into the camps, and in fact others. Unfortunately, there are some cases of infection, and I think some people have died in the camp. So we need to be extra careful. So this is putting an extra layer of challenge for all of us. And I think, it's a challenge for us as a whole. And as you know, South Asia has now become a kind of a hotspot in terms of COVID-19. And recently, Coxs Bazar has been kind of designated as a red zone. So it's going to be something that we will have to face, and government is trying its best, but I think there is a huge coordination issue with this COVID-19. But we again have to put our resources and our heads together to deal with this issue. And I think one element that I need to stress is the fact that there is a trust deficit in the camp when it comes to, particularly when it comes to COVID-19. Refugees are very reluctant to report their illness to the authorities because they feel that they will be taken away and they will not come back. So we are actually working, CPJ is working with others to actually see how we can increase this level of trust within the community, working with volunteers and other CBOs. So this is, I feel after doing quite a bit of work in the camps and particularly focusing COVID-19, the trust element is going to be a major factor, and the sooner we can address this, the better. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, so I think we're almost out of time, and I'm just reflecting a bit on, what might lie ahead for the Rohingya and the humanitarian response to help meet their needs while they are in displacement. Bangladesh, you know, as you pointed out, has shouldered a huge burden in sheltering them so far, but we know that the Rohingya's plight is not over. It's far from over. So thank you so much for helping us understand how these themes of family separation and livelihood, localization, resilience all fit together. The policymakers clearly have their work cut out for them, as do the humanitarian agencies. And, you know, we can't yet say what the lasting impacts of the pandemic will be, but we know it will be tremendous. So we have to keep watching the situation and ensuring that Rohingya and host communities alike continue to get the support they need, and that international and local partners are working together on this. So those are just some of my kind of wrap up thoughts. Did you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Sure, thank you, Jessica. As you've just said, I think we have to forge those relationships at the local, at the national, at the international level. We have to probably kind of re-engage in a certain way that would actually address some of these kind of unprecedented issues that we are facing at the moment. But I think what is very important is that the policymakers will have to really rethink on a number of different issues. It's not going to be work as usual, the work that normally we do. It's going to be a different kind of paradigm that we are looking at. And I think that would also mean that we need to rethink also and reassess how resources are diverted and put into different sectors, and how that will improve the quality of life for all of us, and particularly for those who are most deprived in our societies, like the refugees and the slum dwellers and others. So I think, you know, this is going to be an ongoing process, and I think, you know, hopefully we can come out of this situation with a new sort of vision which will take us forward. And I think CPJ and all of us will kind of work together to build a more resilient and inclusive, sustainable societies all over the world. I think that's the vision, that's the dream that we all have. Thank you.
Great. Manzoor, Hasan, thank you so much. You are leading us as the Executive Director of the Center for Peace and Justice, and it's great to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll just turn it back over to Nathan for any final thoughts from his side.
Great, thanks Jessica, and thank you to Jess and Manzoor for this important and interesting discussion on the situation currently in Coxs Bazar, Bangladesh. For more information on this project in particular and the cross-border local research network, you can visit the Asia Foundation's website, asiafoundation.org. The next video in this Ask the Expert series is hosted by the Rift Valley Institute and features a conversation between Saro Ahmed Koshin and Freddie Carver on aid, mobility, and displacement in the Horn of Africa. Thank you for joining us.